Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Joshua Keene, who is an accredited advisor of insurance. And he works mainly with manufacturing companies and contractors. But what we're going to be discussing today actually applies to every business, in my opinion, because we're going to talk about how systems actually helps businesses to mitigate risk and prevent loss. So we're going to give some examples and give you ideas on how you can implement it in your own business to make sure that you are doing whatever you can to mitigate the risk and prevent loss, etc. So Joshua, hello. So good to have you on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Adi. I'm really grateful to be here.
You are very welcome. All right, so let's dive into it. And in terms of loss and risk mitigation, give us a little bit more about that subject. Like when we hear that term being used a lot. And I know that, the way you break it down in terms of people, in terms of systems, in terms of equipment, in terms of cybersecurity, everything that has to do with loss. What is loss? Like what should business owners should look at or pay attention to in terms of preventing loss?
That's a good question. So yeah, and it's really complex because there's a lot of different areas where a loss can occur. So when I'm helping my clients with loss, we're usually looking at losses related to their people. So people getting hurt, people causing some kind of damage or some kind of liability that ends up getting the business sued, or even their people suing them because of something related to discrimination. So there's a lot of things that can happen with your employees that lead to a loss. And then with everything else, your property. So obviously you want to prevent fires, you want to prevent theft. The big one, you mentioned it, the big one lately has been cyber. And so there's a lot of different ways where your business can incur a loss, and having the right systems in place can help you mitigate those and help you prevent those. And you can just have general philosophies related to your losses and preventing them, or you can have super specific documented processes, which is what you should be doing for each type of loss. And so that can get really detailed. It can get into a specific type of loss. So a big one for businesses is business auto accidents for your business. And so
that's a good one, actually. So that let's take that one, because if you are a business, especially if you're a contractor or manufacturing, you will have cars, you will have vans, you'll have trucks, you'll have the entire, you will have some kind of a fleet, right? Exactly. And you have to make sure that you're protected and that you set systems internally in order to prevent that loss. So what would be some of the systems that you would recommend putting in place in order to mitigate the risk of having loss from having a fleet department?
Sure. And it's a really big one. Business auto rates are really expensive on the insurance side. And so, and it's nice because if you don't already have systems in place, you should have systems for fleet safety in place. But if you don't, you're usually going to be asked about them by your insurance carrier, and that is going to generate a conversation. They're going to ask things like, what are your hiring requirements? When you hire someone, how many tickets or accidents do you allow them to have? And then is that documented in your employee handbook so that everybody is held to that criteria? Do you make them bring their motor vehicle report so that you actually have proof of that? Or are you waiting until you hire them, try to add them to your insurance and find out, oh, this person has a DUI and we can't actually have them drive our vehicles? And so it's going to have specific stuff related to your hiring. They're going to ask things about once you've hired someone, how are you making sure that they're a good driver? So if I'm a plumber and I hire some new help, am I having them drive around with me in the van for the first couple weeks or first month or so to see what their behaviors are and maybe doing some training to correct things if we see any issues. And then, so those are the things you should be doing. And then you should have the documentation and those processes in place so that it's being done the same way for every person that you hire.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really a very good point. So you should have, as a business, you should have your hiring processes documented, right? So from different various reasons,
yeah.
For compliance, obviously, but also to make sure that you are hiring correctly and that you are uniform and that you have the right system in place on how to hire. And and I've interviewed and made several podcasts about hiring and onboarding, but part of that hiring process should include also the legal issues, as you were, or I don't know if I would call it legal, but basically the requirements and the what do you check, what do you don't check, et cetera, that you can actually make sure that you are mitigating risk by doing it every single time. Exactly. So I would assume that that's something, Joshua, that you help your clients with in terms of they can show you their hiring procedures, and then you will tell them pointers in terms of what to add to it, right?
Exactly. That's a big part of what we do on the loss control side. And, we're talking about hiring specifically as it pertains to losses on the auto, but as you know, that can affect a company at every level, whether back to the plumbing, it's a good example. If you hire someone to go out and fix a clogged drain and they're not properly trained on how to do that, or they don't know the set process on how to do that, they go out and do a bad job, and then your client has a flood. That's a big liability loss caused by your employee. And then it can come down to, the employment practices liability stuff too. So if you're, you don't hire, you're not compliant in your hiring, you're not treating everybody the same from start to finish, then you're going to run into issues on that side with employment liability. And
absolutely.
So the hiring is huge. It's like the starting point of everything. And if you're having losses, it's a good place to go back to, whether you're having a lot of theft, whether you're having a lot of auto accidents, whether you've had multiple cyber attacks, whatever it is, look at your employees, because they're usually what's letting these things in. And then if it's across the board, it's part of your culture, you might need to go back to your hiring and find out what's causing this and how can we make sure we're hiring the right people to prevent this.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a client in common that I've just before this podcast, I was talking to them, and that's one of the things that we're looking at is revamping that hiring procedure and making sure that we are hiring the right people that really fit into that they are hiring, the right people that fit in. They're basically the right people in the right seats, so they can actually have people that are part of their culture and working together. So then you mitigate that risk for sure. Yeah. So we talked about hiring. What other areas of the businesses do you usually look at in terms of that are important in terms of having procedures to mitigate risk and making sure that we're preventing loss?
Yeah, so the one more quick one on the business auto is just having a fleet checklist. They'll ask about that. So that's an easy checklist you can put into your system, have documented somewhere, and then you have a weekly procedure. Your employees do a vehicle walk around. They check for brakes, they check for brake lights, things like that. And then they sign off on that and turn that in every week. So not only do you have the process set, but you're documenting that you're following the process. And that's not going to just keep people accountable and avoid the losses, but it's also going to help you with your insurance carrier, which is a big part of why we do this too. We want to prevent the losses, but we also want insurers to be willing to cover the losses. And so when we go to shop your insurance, having these things in place makes a big difference as far as your rates and how many options you have with the carriers you can work with.
Very good point. Very good point. All right. So let's go back to the question in terms of, like, we were talking about the hiring and we talked about the auto. What other areas in the business do you see that having systems will help in terms of risk mitigation?
So another big one that we're seeing a lot right now, it's in the news constantly. We had the oil pipeline that was hacked, cyber attacks are happening constantly. So there was JBS Food, so it was a big meat distributor. Their freezer systems were hacked. And as you can imagine, if you shut down the freezers to a huge meat plant, the losses are going to be catastrophic. And so
totally. It's just well, we don't go there. We won't say our opinion about that and why people do that. But what do we do in order to prevent it? So what could have that, in your opinion, what that company could have done in order to prevent such outcome, basically such catastrophe?
Yeah, so it's going to come down to systems again. So, I'm usually sitting down with my client when we're talking about cyber risk and asking things like, do you have a basic firewall in place? Just the basics. Do you have a firewall? Do you have secure passwords? Is your email secure? Are you using two-factor authentication? That's a big one right now that can help you and protect you in a lot of ways. And then again, it's going to come down to people. Are you training your people on what to look for? So a lot of employers now, their employees regularly receive emails that are actually staged by the employer, but they are basically like a hack or a phishing email. And whenever one of their employees clicks on the link or replies to the email and gives some info they shouldn't have given, luckily it didn't actually go to a hacker. It goes to your IT person or whoever's handling that. And then they can sit down and train that person and put them back through a training module if they need to go through that again, on how to watch out for that stuff and how to prevent that stuff.
That's a great idea, actually. Really like putting it to a test to make sure that train the employees to what to look for, because that's really important. And that also should be documented in terms of like what emails to open, what not, right? That would be part of the documentation. And the whole training is part of the system that is being created. And, it's interesting because I was really excited about talking to you about this because, we always hear about like, why do we need systems? It's because we need consistency, because we are, in order to improve efficiency, in order to improve effectiveness, in order to be able to sell the business, in order for employee retention, etc. But really a big part of why you need systems is for risk mitigation. And that is something that is, I know I said I'm excited, but probably people will go like, what are you excited about? It doesn't sound like a very exciting subject, but it really is, because that's probably the make break that can save your business if you actually have it in place. And all it takes really, and correct me if you think otherwise, Joshua, but it's really some organizational skills in order to think ahead of what can happen, and spending the time and the attention to actually sit down and figure out the different outcomes that can happen, that can occur in your business if you don't have those systems, and put a little bit of time putting those systems together, so then you can prevent a huge loss, right?
Yeah, no, it's huge. It makes a huge difference. Back to our mutual client, we both know, they're trying to grow, but they've also seen some losses, and you're helping them get these systems in place because they went from zero to blowing up, and now they need them. But it would have been so much easier if they had those things in place from the get-go. As you probably know, if they didn't have however many current employees they have that weren't trained on the old way, plus the new ones they were bringing in, it'd be a lot easier to make sure that it's the same across the board and that everybody's doing everything the same. So yeah, that's huge from a risk mitigation standpoint. And it's also huge for their growth. And not only, you come in, you help, a lot of that's why you help them with that, is so they can grow and not worry about all the little moving parts and just focus on scaling. But those systems, they affect your risk, but they also even affect how how do I word this? They affect how your risk and your growth work together, in that you're going to have opportunities come along, and maybe the contract will say, hey, you need a $4 million cyber policy instead of this little bit that you have on your current policy. If you go to get that coverage so you can win that contract and you don't have any systems in place, it's going to be hard to get the coverage, and then it's something that can stifle your growth. So all these things work together.
Absolutely. One of my favorite tools is the doing a SWOT analysis, right? The strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Mm-hmm. So the strengths and weaknesses are internal, right? You look at the internal, and then the opportunities and threats are external. So when you have an opportunity like you just mentioned, it made me think about, yeah, you have that opportunity is external and you have to do whatever you need to do to make sure you can service, you have enough strengths and you fix the weaknesses internal in order to service that opportunity. But on the other hand, you also, at the same time, you also have to look at the threats, at the outside threats, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about in terms of like what can happen and how can we prevent it so it does not happen. So those are excellent points. Any other areas of companies, because you work with a lot of companies, you're a very successful advisor in terms of insurance. I know you have a lot of clients that you work with. So you have that exposure to the industry, to the different companies. And that's why I love having trusted advisors on this program, because they have so much knowledge and so much experience by seeing different types of businesses, right? So what else can you tell us in terms of risk or loss prevention that you have seen in companies that might not be that obvious, that we think about it every day, but that is still there and it would be good to have systems in place?
Yeah, well, we focused a lot on the hiring, and I don't want to keep beating that, but or hammering that in, but that's really always one of the first things that comes up, and you would think it's obvious, but it's just, I think a lot of the time someone starts a business and things just start to grow and take off, and one thing leads to the next, and they're a few years in and they haven't done those things yet. So that's really a big one, is being proactive from the get-go. Right. I know that's a really general, more of a philosophical statement than a particular type of risk, but that would just be, it's huge. Like you said, you need to sit down and think about the potential types of things that can happen to your business. So whether it's your employees out driving around, whether it's your employees out interacting with customers, how are they interacting with customers that could lead to lawsuits or things like that. Just a big one that is part of why you help people with the processes on the hiring is employment practices liability. So that's probably the other one of the most important areas to make sure you're checking all your boxes on processes. Again, we've talked about hiring as it pertains to business auto and employees as it pertains to cyber, but then there's just the hiring itself, and having employees in itself carries a lot of risk with it. And so, having defined expectations for your employees, having roles defined, so that if you need to take disciplinary action or let go of an employee, it's not a surprise. Having just really strong set processes in place that can help you avoid discrimination or the perception of discrimination, so that everybody feels like they're being treated properly. And that's more of a case where you want to bring in an HR specialist if you don't have a set HR person. But that's where we see a ton of losses, especially since the pandemic happened and we had all these layoffs and people being sent home. It created a lot of turmoil with employees and employers, and people feeling like they just weren't treated fairly by their employer. And whether they were or not, they can still sue. And you just want to make sure you have the processes in place to show that, if it is not a valid complaint on the employee's part, you at least checked all your boxes and covered yourself.
For sure. Absolutely. And that is really important to have that, not just the hiring system, as you were saying, but also the employee management system in writing, documented in a place. And that's why I like to use process documentation software like Suite Process or Whale or Trenual, because it just allows you to have something centralized that everybody has access. So you can say, oh, I didn't know where that policy is. It's a platform, it's a cloud platform where you can log in and you can give your employees login credentials and they can log in and see your documentation right there. You can also see when they logged in, and you can have proof of them doing that. So it's like a knowledge base that is open for everyone, and you're inviting everybody in, because as both of you and I know, it's the writing processes is one of the things that you can do, and it's really also covers you, and you can show that you actually made the effort to do that. But we're here not just to have something there, but we're here in order to actually implement it and make sure that the business is growing. So it is only as good as people are going to use it, right? And it's only as good as people are going to use it, is only as good as it comes from the leadership, with having that mindset that, yeah, we are using those processes and procedures across the board. And if you are a new person that is working for this company now, then this is what you do. This is your login. This is how you go in. This is how you can read it. So you have that ability to get them to read those processes and apply them from there, right? I mean, what do you think about application? Like, what did you see successful or not successful in terms of businesses utilizing the processes that they wrote?
Well, you mentioned leadership, and I think if it's not clear to employees that the leaders are actually bought into the processes, then they're going to go through the motions in the same way that the leadership is going through the motions. And you do see that with leadership, where they will have these processes in place because it's just something you do, and they're just trying to, be compliant and make sure they have the things in place so that, whoever they report to that's asking about it says, okay, yeah, you've got it in place. But it's hard. It's almost like parenting, with your employees. Like, how do you convey that we have these rules in place for a reason? Like, we're not just doing this so that we can win that contract, or so we can get a better deal on our insurance, or just get insurance in general and get those people off our back once we have the policy in place. We actually want to prevent losses. We actually don't want you to get hurt, you, the employee. We actually want you to be able to come to work tomorrow, and we don't want the building to be burned down and you not be able to work because you weren't able to come in, just across the board. And that's a real leadership problem that I might not have answers to. Like, how do you get your employees to take ownership over the risk to your business and have it be like, if I'm out on the road and I hit someone with an employee vehicle, I'm an employee of a company and I hit someone with an employee vehicle, am I going to take ownership and know that the policy of the company is to say, sorry, let me back up. Let's say the policy is that if I hit someone, I should never admit fault. No matter what happened, I should never admit fault. Even if I feel bad, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're just following the procedure. You never admit fault in an auto accident. So how do I get that person in that situation to actually own that and say, no, this is just the process and I'm sticking to it to protect myself and my company, rather than having them say, no, this is just, messed up. I was looking at my phone and crashed into these people and now someone's hurt. And so I'm just going to be honest and tell them what happened. That's one of those, I don't know. Maybe
it's a tough one. And, and I think really is like with any process, the way that we make sure that it's implemented by all is really getting the why behind it. Now, this is a little bit tricky because I can see that, but what's the why behind the policy? Like, why do we have the policy, right?
Yeah.
Because what will be the consequences if you actually violate the policy? Just get a bigger understanding of it. It might be that then, you're risking the place of employment for 200 people because the company will have to shut down or go bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, you have to explain what are the consequences, or because other people can take advantage of it. Whatever it is, you have to show what's the why behind that particular policy that you set in place, and run people through it in terms of just like the example you gave in terms of setting those fictitious emails that are not really phishing emails, but they are. I mean, they look like, and they basically, if somebody followed the policy, they would not go there. If they didn't, they will open it, and then it gives time, an opportunity for more training. So the same thing, you take the policy, you explain the why, you have people read it, you have people apply it either by role playing or by putting them in certain situations where they will have to use it, and then it becomes second nature. But again, it comes from the leadership. The leadership has to embrace it. They have to care about it. They have to, whenever they release a new policy, to explain the why, etc. So those are the things that can be done in order to make sure that the policies, procedures, the processes are followed by all.
Yeah, I agree that, and when you're telling people why, maybe just not saying we have these systems because we don't want to get hacked, maybe adding, our competitor over in the neighboring state did X, Y, and Z, having an actual story of how it happened to a similar business, so that it's a real theme. It becomes a tangible, real theme rather than just being a process and, you're just a talking head going over it. I'm just going to sign and go back to doing what I was doing and forget about that interaction. Whereas if you give me an actual story with the why, I might actually understand the importance of it more.
I love it. And I agree. It's telling the story with the why. And then I would also add to it, then ask people for their own story or make up a story if they don't have one, in terms of like going back meaning, then you revert it to them and you ask them, okay, so if we get hacked, what do you think will happen? Really get them to live their future story of what will happen if you get hacked, right? Mm-hmm. Or that meat factory, what happened to the employees, what happened to to their livingness, to their families, to everything that it surrounds, to the customers, to just think outside just your sphere, but make them think bigger so they can see the consequence of opening one email can destroy the livelihood of so many, right? Exactly. And I know I make it sound dramatic, but it really is. I mean, that's why we have those risk mitigating procedures, so we do not face those risk scenarios or situations.
Yeah. And with those monster companies we see in the news, they might be big enough to just pay their employees and get through it, but a local company, like the customers that we usually deal with, it might literally shut them down for months or just put them out of business altogether. And then Absolutely. You have anywhere from 5 to 10 to 150 employees that need to go find a job all of a sudden. And so it's like, again, you don't want to use the scare tactics too much, but it is real. These are real risks, and they can affect not just the person who causes the loss, but everybody at the company.
Exactly. I mean, in this case, it's not really scare tactics because it's really get somebody to think about why you are doing something, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you, for instance, it really is true for any procedure you're documenting. So if you're documenting a procedure on how to, clean the dishes and put them in the dishwasher so the break room is clean, you also, in order for it to be enforced, we have to look at the consequences all around, not just our actions. So you can go, okay, so let's say, imagine you walk into the break room and you have, cups and glasses and everything everywhere. I mean, how would you feel? So you kind of like get the other person to see the bigger picture, or do you feel like it's safe, now, in terms of the germs, in terms of viruses, whatnot, right? I mean, does it give you a good vibe, or do you feel like, oh, I don't want to, I can't even make my own coffee here because it's so dirty? If you think about different scenarios where it becomes more real and not just reading and signing something, you have a better chance of remembering it as well and applying it.
Yeah. And then I think with leaders, because even leaders sometimes aren't fully bought in, but if you say you're there helping with processes because these leaders want to increase their profits, they want to scale, they want to sit down with you and do the math on how much profit adding one technician, adds to their company and things like that. But if they're looking at it just from that perspective and not thinking about the risk and preventing the loss, that's kind of silly, because let's say they do add 2 techs, blow up their revenue and have a really awesome year, and then one of those techs next year causes a catastrophic loss and they're back to where they started, because it's I don't know, it's building a house without a foundation.
Absolutely.
About those things, and so it's really just critical to think about it from the beginning, even when you're just small and don't see how big you're going to get. It's just being proactive.
Absolutely. So, hopefully, Joshua, we inspired our listeners to start thinking in that direction or looking at the systems that they have. So let's say somebody is listening to us right now, they're a business owner, and they're thinking, wow, I haven't thought about it. I have probably places where it can be pretty risky if something happens, right? That I didn't mitigate the risk, and there may be holes that lead to a loss. They start thinking, and it can become overwhelming to start thinking about everything right now, right? Mm-hmm. So what will be your tip or suggestion in terms of like where to start? Like what would be like the first 3 steps that they should take in order to make sure that they are on the right path to figure out where the risk can happen and how to mitigate it?
Yeah, well, a good first place to start is with your commercial insurance agent. They should have a good understanding of loss control and how to prevent the losses. Although that's not always the relationship between businesses and their agent. A lot of the time their agent is just someone who provides the policies, provides the coverages, and that's really it. So if that's the situation with your current agent and you don't have a working business relationship where they can sit down and talk about your losses and make sure you're doing all the preventive, not just the insurance, buy this insurance policy, but what are you doing to prevent it to begin with? Then the next best step would be to contact or reach out to someone that specializes in loss control. There's tons of companies in the area that focus on loss control, and it's usually really reasonable to have them come in. They just know what questions to ask. If your agent doesn't, they will, as far as, going through everything we've talked about here. What's your hiring look like? What does your fleet safety look like? What's your cybersecurity look like? And then once they've identified all of your potentials for loss or your risks, they can help you put together an actual plan or write out a summary. Like, here are the things that you should implement. Some of those companies will actually help you implement those plans. Sometimes they'll just give you, a really in-depth summary, and then they would work with someone like you to come in and work that into their handbook, as we did with a recent client. They brought in a third-party loss control company, and then we all kind of just worked together to make sure that stuff was worked into their employee handbook. And now hopefully that will minimize losses and shed them in a far better light with carriers when we go to shop their insurance.
Absolutely. Great advice. Absolutely. And Joshua, you are an amazing advisor to businesses. I've seen the businesses that you work with, but you are licensed in Oregon and Washington. So if we have listeners that are in Oregon and Washington, definitely they should contact you. So why don't you share with us your contact info, the best way to contact you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, just Joshua Keene, AAI. You can email me at jkeene, that's KEENE @EPBB.com, or just give me a call at 971-255-5214. And those are my contact details. Lots of ways to reach out to me, and I would love to answer any questions, or if you don't feel like you've had someone sit down and really get into the details of loss control and these systems, I'd love to have that conversation.
Awesome. And now if they go on LinkedIn, they're going to see that you actually ran a half marathon, right? Last week. On Sunday. And that was definitely something you were working towards. So just in a closing, what inspired you to do that? And how did it feel to actually accomplish that dream?
It was great. It was just one of those things where coming into my mid 30s, and like most people in my situation, I'm a father of 3. I've been married for a little while, and haven't focused on health very much for the last, decade. So I was just, ready to be fit, ready to be healthy again. And around January, started training and just running to run. And then once I started feeling good and recognized that I enjoyed running, I scheduled some races. So did a half marathon on the 4th of July, and I'm signed up for my first marathon in October, the Portland Marathon.
Fantastic. Wow. This is exciting.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Well done. All right, Joshua, great having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing this information and your knowledge. And I'm sure our listeners are going to benefit from it as well.
Thank you. It was great. Great to be here, Adi. Have a good day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.